Hello, my name is Rebecca Zirkelbach, and I am a graduate student at Morningside University. I am also a K-5 special education teacher focusing on students with behavior disorders for 4 Mile Elementary in the Southeast Polk School District. And I will be talking about breaking the cycle of prompt dependency, the effect of visual cues, schedules, social emotional learning, and the need for prompts by special education participants. The reason that this is so important to me is that many of the students that I have very much struggle with the problem of prompt dependency. So our problem is that when students wait for the prompt to start or complete a mastered task that can be completed without prompting, knowledge and learning may be missed. So for those of you that are new to prompting, there are multiple types and levels of prompts that are traditionally used with students that need some sort of help. There are physical prompting, so that might be hand over hand, literally helping them write or draw what they need to do. Modeling, which is showing them. Verbal, telling them. And gestural, which is maybe pointing or some other sign telling them what they need to be doing. Now, the current research revolves around a few main areas. One of those is structured learning and task systems. These are systems that are designed to be very explicitly taught. They are typically used with students with autism or other diagnoses that may cause a learning delay. They do show moderate success with prompt dependency, but that requires a lot of preparation to be used correctly, and they can be very time consuming and usually require multiple adults to implement. Prompts and schedules in technology. There were multiple studies done where digital activity schedules and video modeling were used, and they were successful at increasing independence in students and decreasing that need for prompts. Pre-recorded prompting sequences and video modeling and digital field trips were used with older kids. It was definitely noted that these methods only work well for students when they are already familiar with the process. With something new, it did not necessarily work as well or was as effective. Now, interventions. There are 3 main types that were studied, and that is using reinforcement. So some sort of positive reinforcement system. So moderate to high reinforcement resulted in larger independence, but did not increase prompt dependency. So it did not increase students' frequency of asking, how do you do this? Show me to do this, or anything like that. The next part was prompt fading, which is removing prompts as a task continues or as it is mastered or finished. And then there's extended response interval, which is waiting for responses from students. This had a much higher error rate, and it is important to note that this study did not necessarily focus on students that were already identified as prompt dependent. Some of the limits of the current studies is that they do not show much success in breaking the cycle of prompt dependency once it's in place. And studies also primarily focus on students that have been diagnosed with autism spectrum disorder. And all the studies were very small scale and were not duplicated by any other researchers. So the purpose of my study is to investigate the relationship between an increase in self-confidence and visual schedules and that effect on prompt dependency. The current research gap specifically relates to the size of the studies that have been done and inconsistencies on what's been studied. Many of the studies did not directly study prompt dependency. They ended up actually studying other pieces, and one of the results was the increase or decrease of prompt dependency. All the studies that were looked at show a positive correlation towards prompt dependency. However, the sample population for the studies was very, very small. Most were less than 5 students, And as I said, none of the studies were duplicated. And none of the studies were large scale enough to stand solidly on their own. As I stated in the beginning, many of my students do struggle with that waiting for the prompt and finding a way to combat this or break this for students that move in or really struggle with it could make a large impact overall for our students, what they're learning, and how much adult support is needed for those kids. So my study was a case study, and I had 6 male participants, all coming from my roster, and they're all special ed students, and they're ranging from 7 to 10 years old. I had 2 second grade students and 2 third grade students that each had a white and African American student in each grade, and then 2 fourth grade students, both of which were white. And the students come from a variety of socioeconomic backgrounds and a variety of family authority structures. Some are single parents, some are dual parents, some are same sex, some live with grandparents, but all students have at least one sibling. The main materials that were used was the Superflex curriculum. It's a 13-lesson curriculum that focuses around teaching students to have flexible thinking and self-confidence in their ability to get through problems. And then a social emotional learning survey that was administered 3 times throughout, right at the beginning to test students' social emotional levels and their self-confidence, in the middle, and then again at the end. And then we also used schedules, visual schedules, and visual prompts for students, and depending on the student, it looked a little bit different. Some students, it was their own visual schedule that they kept with them. Others, it was up in their classroom, and it was gone over at least twice a day. And then the Superflex curriculum was used every day for at least 15 minutes and was done in a small group setting. Then all of the observational data was analyzed in thematic grouping. So the results, there were 3 main areas that came out of the observations of students and their need for prompts. And those main areas were academic subjects, student response, and adult response. So it was noticed that core subject areas are the biggest trigger area for students where they might need that additional prompt. But social studies, science, and specials, which is PE, art, music, media, STEM, except for music, do generally not cause issue or need for an extra prompt. Student response to these extra prompts, verbal disruption, which yelling and screaming or wandering around the room, physical aggression, or repeated or continued ignoring of the direction or the prompt, or resuming the work. Adult response to the need was additional prompting with the task, the direction, or what the next steps might be. So I see that you look like you're stuck. After you finish writing, remember the next step is to type it or something along those lines so that kids could help make their own timeline of what they needed to do. Offering break or extra processing time or offering help. So throughout the study, students started out with roughly 13% days in a week without the need of a prompt. And by the end of the study, we were up to 25% or a quarter of their time. Now, with the social emotional learning survey, there were multiple questions that were asked that revolved around goal setting with grit or their ability to continue working. And students started out feeling that they were somewhat likely to be able to do that on their own. And at the end felt like they were quite likely. With growth mindset, students appeared at the beginning to have a very fixed mindset and did not feel that there was a lot of possibility for change in these areas. And by the end, they felt like it was quite possible to change these areas and that there was always room to grow. For their self-management, they felt that they were okay. They came prepared to class and followed directions, but often did not pay attention and struggled to stay focused. And by the end, they felt like they could stay focused and be prepared. And the same with their self-efficacy. They started out quite sure and somewhat sure, and ended almost entirely quite sure on their skills. So, with all of this information, the biggest pieces are that, again, did I fill a gap in the research? Mine was also a small case study, so I'm not a standalone. But I took multiple pieces from other studies and put them together with the visual schedules, and also added in that self-confidence curriculum, because that was where the gap appeared to be in my students. And the data with my students showed that it does make a big impact in their ability to do things on their own. Now, there were limitations from my end as well. Some of my students had other changes that may play a part. Some had a medication change. I had a few associates that changed. So there are areas that could also be influencing factors. But their progress is obvious. And when doing the research, the self-determination theory states that people need to feel confident and capable, as well as feel as though they have control over their lives. Prior to the study and prior to our Superflex curriculum and the schedules, the way a student felt like they could have control was by requesting that prompt or waiting for that extra prompt, because then they knew what was going to happen, it appeared. Now they have the self-confidence to feel in control without having to have that extra support, which allows for adults to support others and for students to thrive and succeed on their own. The next steps that I would suggest would be to try this again, exactly the way that it's been done, and see if the results are truly able to be duplicated. Because if they are, this is a technique that I would use with students of many ages, many times, because it has such a positive effect on their overall capabilities. So those are my findings, and I appreciate you listening. And these are my sources for, or my references for, this presentation. Thank you.